welcome to the Learning English podcast. We're doing a deep dive today on some really effective ways to learn English.
I'm excited.
I am too.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
And I'm Jessica.
And before we get started, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button, share this deep dive, and leave a comment. We love hearing from you.
Yes, we do.
All right, let's get started. We're going to be looking at learning English, real-life experiences, and practical tips.
Yes.
And what's really cool about this piece is that it's packed with stories and advice from people who've actually learned English successfully.
Yes, it's all about, real life experiences.
Yeah.
It's one thing to learn grammar rules from a textbook,
Yeah.
but it's a whole different ballgame to hear how real people from all over the world have actually mastered English. And this piece dives right into that with the concept of immersion.
Right. Just surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible. Like they tell this story about Maria, who moved to the U.S. from Spain and really struggled with the language at first. But she started listening to English podcasts while she commuted, switched her TV shows to English with subtitles, even started following English-speaking social media accounts. It's like she created her own little English world.
It's incredible. What she did is she didn't just passively consume English content.
Right.
But she actively sought out ways to integrate the language into her everyday life. And that's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
It's not just about exposure. It's about active engagement.
So it's more than just like watching a movie in English. It's about really paying attention to the language.
Yes.
Maybe even writing down new words or phrases you hear.
Exactly. And, if we look at the science behind this, the principle of neuroplasticity comes into play.
Oh, wow.
Our brains are incredibly adaptable. And when we consistently expose ourselves to a new language, our brains actually start to rewire themselves, forming new connections that make it easier to process and understand that language.
It's like our brains are literally changing as we learn English.
Precisely. And the more we actively engage with the language, the stronger those connections become. Think of it like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So even like small, consistent efforts can actually have a really significant impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing.
Now think about your own daily routine.
Okay.
What's one small change you could make today to increase your English exposure? Could you change the language settings on your phone, listen to an English podcast during your commute? Even just spending 15 minutes reading an English news article can make a difference.
That's a really good idea. Small steps, but,
Yes,
they can really add up over time.
they really do.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about speaking practice.
Yes.
The source emphasizes the importance of actually talking with native or fluent English speakers, and they share a story about Ahmed, a learner from Egypt.
Ahmed's story is really interesting because he had a solid grasp of English grammar, but he was terrified of actually speaking. He had this mental block, this fear of making mistakes and sounding foolish.
I can totally relate to that.
Right.
I remember when I first started learning Spanish, I knew all the verb conjugations.
Yeah.
But actually stringing together a sentence in a real conversation, totally different.
Exactly. It's like we build up all these psychological barriers around speaking, but the reality is, everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
Right, even native speakers.
And the more we practice, the more confident and fluent we become.
So it's about getting out of our comfort zone and just going for it.
Yeah.
Even if we stumble at first.
Exactly. Think about learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You're probably going to fall a few times, but eventually, with practice, you'll find your balance and it'll become second nature. Speaking English is similar. The more you practice, the more comfortable and natural it will feel.
Okay, so where can people find these opportunities for speaking practice? Because I imagine not everyone has access to like a language exchange program or an English speaking club.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But there are so many resources available these days. The source mentions apps like Tandem and HelloTalk, which connect language learners from all over the world.
Oh, that's cool. Like a virtual language exchange.
Exactly.
Nice.
And these platforms offer a safe and supportive environment to practice your speaking skills without feeling judged. Plus, there are tons of online conversation groups, forums, and even online games where you can interact with English speakers.
Oh, wow. So even if you don't have native speakers in your immediate circle, you can still find ways to get comfortable with speaking.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not just about finding the perfect opportunity. Sometimes even small interactions can be incredibly valuable.
Like what? Just striking up a conversation with someone at a coffee shop, or even just practicing your English while ordering food at a restaurant.
Exactly. Every little bit of practice helps.
I love that.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there,
yeah,
what's holding you back from speaking more English?
What could be your language exchange equivalent?
What small step can you take today to push yourself outside of your comfort zone? It could be downloading a language exchange app, joining an online conversation group,
Exactly.
or even just resolving to speak English more often with a friend or a colleague who's also learning.
Take that first step and see where it leads you. You might be surprised by how much progress you can make.
Before we move on to the world of language learning apps, let's pause for a moment and let our listeners reflect on these ideas. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive. Welcome back to the Learning English podcast. We're diving deep into effective ways to learn English, and I'm excited to pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
We're just talking about the importance of speaking practice and pushing past those fears of making mistakes. And now we're going to explore how technology can be a powerful tool on this journey.
The rise of language learning apps has been a game changer.
Right.
For so many people wanting to learn English. The piece we're looking at, Learning English, real-life experiences and practical tips, highlights apps like Duolingo, Babbel, and Memrise, and it's fascinating to see how they've been incorporated into people's lives. They even share a story about Lina, a busy professional from Brazil who used Duolingo to fit learning into her jam-packed schedule.
That's a common challenge,
Yes.
right? Like, life gets busy.
It does.
And it's hard to carve out the time for, dedicated study.
Exactly.
I can imagine these apps are really helpful
Yeah.
for people who can't commit to traditional classes.
That's exactly the beauty of app-based learning. It's accessible, it's convenient,
Yeah.
and it often incorporates gamified elements like points and rewards that can make learning more engaging.
It's all about making it fun.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It's like tricking your brain into enjoying the process.
But are there any downsides to relying solely on apps for language learning? I mean, they can't be a magic bullet, can they?
You raise an excellent point.
Yeah.
While language learning apps can be fantastic tools, they do have limitations.
Okay.
One key drawback is the lack of personalized feedback. You might be practicing incorrect pronunciation or grammar without even realizing it, and an app might not always catch those errors.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's like trying to learn to play a musical instrument by just watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
You might be able to pick up some basics.
Yeah.
But you really need that guidance from a teacher to correct your technique.
Absolutely.
And refine your skills.
That's a great analogy. So while apps are great for building vocabulary, reinforcing grammar, and practicing basic skills, they shouldn't be the only tool in your arsenal.
Right.
They're best used in conjunction with other learning methods, like speaking practice with a partner or immersing yourself in authentic English content.
So it's all about finding the right balance. Our listeners might want to try out different apps and see which ones click with their learning styles and goals.
Absolutely. Explore different options and see what works best for you. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Now, let's turn our attention to a crucial aspect of mastering any language, and that's listening and pronunciation. The source highlights how challenging it can be to understand spoken English, especially with all the different accents and slang out there.
Oh, for sure. Even for native English speakers like me, sometimes I struggle to understand certain accents.
It's true.
They share a story about Jing, a Chinese student studying the UK, who initially had a really hard time understanding the British accent.
Oh, wow.
I can only imagine how overwhelming that must have been.
It's definitely a hurdle for many learners, but Jing found a clever way to overcome this challenge.
Right.
She immersed herself in a wide variety of English content.
Okay.
Watching TV shows and listening to podcasts with different accents.
So it's like training your ear.
It's like training your ear to decipher different sounds and rhythms, almost like a musician learning to distinguish different musical notes.
That's a fantastic way to put it. So this ear training is essential.
It is.
For becoming a better listener and speaker.
Absolutely. By exposing yourself to different accents, you're essentially helping your brain decode sounds more effectively. It's like building a mental library of sounds.
So instead of sticking to just one accent, it's important to branch out.
Exactly.
And listen to as many different
Embrace the diversity
varieties of English as possible.
Of English pronunciation. Listen to podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube videos, even news broadcasts from different English-speaking countries.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And don't just passively listen. Try repeating phrases and mimicking the sounds you hear. You can even use tools like Youglish to hear how words are pronounced in different contexts.
Oh, that's really cool.
It is.
It's like exercising your vocal cords to get them used to producing those English sounds accurately. Now, let's move on to another building block of language.
Yes.
And that's vocabulary.
Vocabulary acquisition.
The source really stresses the importance of learning vocabulary in context, rather than just memorizing lists of words.
Right. They tell the story of Carlos, a learner from Colombia who struggled to retain new vocabulary words until he started actively using them in conversations.
Oh, okay.
He would take notes on new words he encountered and then make a conscious effort to incorporate them into his next conversation.
It's like taking those words for a test drive in the real world. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. When you learn words in isolation, they're just floating around in your head, detached from any meaning. But when you encounter them in context, you're creating those vital connections in your brain that make them stick.
There's a solid cognitive science basis for this.
Right.
Contextual learning helps us create stronger neural pathways, making it easier to recall and use those words later.
So if you're struggling to remember new vocabulary,
yes,
the key is to use it, use it, use it.
Use it.
Don't be afraid to experiment with those new words in your conversations, even if it feels a bit awkward at first.
Absolutely. Think of it as a mental workout for your vocabulary muscles. The more you flex them, the stronger they'll become.
Okay.
Now, as we continue exploring effective language learning strategies, let's shift our focus to a common obstacle that many learners face, and that's the fear of making mistakes. But first, let's take a moment for our listeners to digest this information. We'll be back shortly to delve deeper into the power of embracing mistakes and setting realistic goals.
Welcome back to the Learning English podcast. We're wrapping up our deep dive into effective ways to learn English, and I'm eager to talk about something that I think holds a lot of learners back: the fear of making mistakes.
It's such a common obstacle.
It really is.
Learning English, real-life experiences, and practical tips addresses this head-on, emphasizing that mistakes are actually valuable learning opportunities. They share a story about John, a learner from Nigeria who was initially terrified of speaking English in public.
I bet a lot of our listeners can relate to that. What was it that helped John overcome his fear?
Well, he was so worried about making errors that he avoided speaking altogether.
Oh, wow.
But then he started having conversations with friends, and he realized that even native speakers make mistakes.
Right.
And more importantly, they appreciated his effort to communicate.
That's such a great point. We often put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. But the reality is that language learning is a journey. It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And a growth mindset where we see mistakes as stepping stones to improvement is crucial. Instead of beating ourselves up over errors, we can view them as feedback, as opportunities to refine our skills.
So how can we shift our perspective and embrace those mistakes? Because I think it's easier said than done for a lot of people.
One helpful tip is to reframe the way we think about mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, we can see them as data points.
Okay.
Each mistake provides us with valuable information about what we need to work on. It's like a little signpost pointing us in the right direction.
I love that analogy.
Oh.
So instead of getting discouraged, we can use those mistakes to adjust our course and keep moving forward. Now, for our final key takeaway, the source highlights the importance of setting realistic goals and tracking your progress.
Yeah, they talk about Sophie, a learner from Germany who had a really clever strategy.
Oh, what was that?
Sophie set small, achievable goals for herself, like learning a few new words each day or writing a short paragraph in English every week.
Yep.
And she kept track of her progress in a journal, celebrating her accomplishments along the way.
It's like breaking down a marathon into manageable miles.
Right. Exactly.
It makes the whole process feel less daunting and more achievable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of goals, let's remind our listeners about the importance of setting SMART goals.
SMART goals. I like that.
SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
So instead of saying, I want to improve my English, a SMART goal might be, I will learn 10 new vocabulary words related to travel each week and practice using them in conversations with my language partner.
Perfect example.
There you go.
By making your goals specific and measurable, you can track your progress more effectively and stay motivated.
Right.
And don't forget the relevant part. Your goals should align with your reasons for learning English.
So are you aiming to travel to an English-speaking country, land a job that requires English proficiency, or simply enjoy English language books and movies more fully?
Your goals should reflect your personal aspirations. This will fuel your motivation and keep you engaged in the learning process.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to learning English. What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely.
The key is to explore different strategies and find what resonates with you, creating your own personalized learning plan.
And don't forget, consistency and patience are your greatest allies. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight.
Yeah, it's definitely a process.
Language learning takes time and effort, but the rewards are well worth it.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. But with dedication and the right approach, you can achieve fluency and unlock a world of opportunities.
As a final thought, I encourage you to pick one strategy from this deep dive that you're excited to implement this week. Whether it's incorporating more English into your daily routine, finding a language partner, or exploring a new language learning app,